So we're up to chapter 7 now, the birth of my son. And here we are, a picture of us on the left, me and my son Julian Samuel Ebert in 2003 when he was born. Both of us were unemployed at about the same time, and now we had to find jobs. I had lost my job at the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and she had lost her job as a construction work supervisor. And what happened is that we both got hired at the same time to work at a brand new bookstore, Half Price Books, which was opening a new branch in Ahwatukee, near where her parents lived. We worked there for about a year and a half and had great fun working together. Some couples can't work together at the same job, but we had no problems whatsoever. She was great at making everyone in the store laugh, and everybody loved her. She would get on the store intercom and make sex jokes that would make everyone blush and laugh at the same time. She was an extremely extroverted, take-charge kind of person. During the night shifts, we would go out to our cars in the parking lot on our lunch break and have sex, then go back to work, refreshed from our orgasms. Meanwhile, I had finished my first book, Twilight of the Clockwork God, and found a publisher, Council Oak Books, out in San Francisco that was in the process of putting it out. This publisher had recently been bought by some zillionaire, the guy who at that time owned Sky Vodka. So they had a bit of money, and they were able to hire a publicist who got me lots of radio interviews, including NPR. And they were also able to pay for a small book tour going up and down the West Coast. So when the book came out in May of 1999, we took a vacation from the bookstore job and went on a book tour of the West Coast, visiting LA, San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland, where I gave very successful book readings at prominent bookstores in each of those cities. The book did very well, sold 4,000 copies right off the bat. It remains to this day my most successful book financially. I had hit a home run at the age of 30 and was very proud of myself. But, of course, pride goeth before a fall, and that's exactly what then proceeded to happen. When we got back to Phoenix, we resumed our jobs at Half Price Books. Things continued to go well for a while. I began to make appearances on television on A&E's Ancient Mysteries, where I was interviewed for 3 shows. One on the Yeti, one on alchemy, and one about dragons. It was an amazing rush when we sat together with my ex's parents to watch for the first time my appearances on cable television. My ex loved it. She said it was like a drug being with somebody in the process of becoming famous. My ex's family and I had already gotten along very well, and now they began to esteem me quite a bit more. They knew their daughter, who was the youngest of a batch of sisters, and just as in the tale of Cinderella, the least regarded, the only one with a weight problem, for instance, had something special in her life now, and I think they were finally proud of her. She had struggled with low self-esteem issues all her life, trying to get her family's approval, but to no avail. I thought they treated her like shit and were always walking all over her, and it made me angry that she put up with such treatment. And that anger towards them may have played a role in what happened next. I think unconsciously I wanted to cut them out of the picture. I was very sexually attracted to her sister, the same sister she had been living with in the house in Tempe when we'd first met. Her sister was then living in London studying chiromancy. She was a gorgeous blonde who was always flirting with me. One day while my ex was back visiting her brother in Virginia, she called me and told me that it was her sister's birthday and that I should take her out to dinner. So we went out to dinner and then went for a long walk and then back to her place. She told me she wanted to read my palm. We both sat cross-legged on the floor in front of each other while she took my hand in her 2 smaller, vaguely cold hands and read my palm. I was very close to her, and I could sense that she wanted me to kiss her, but I didn't take the bait. Not yet. After that, she left for London, and a few weeks rolled by, and I couldn't get her attempt at seducing me out of my mind, so I wrote her a love letter. She then proceeded to shame me by reading the letter to every single one of her family members. When word got back to my ex, she was devastated. I had stabbed her in the back, and now I was no longer something special. I was now the bad guy, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Everyone in the family instructed her to dump me immediately, even though most of them had bad marriages, divorces, and were with physically abusive men. Projection and blame are fun. You don't have to take responsibility for anything. I suppose such a destructive action on my part would have killed a lot of couples, but the fact of the matter was that we loved each other, and it wasn't going to be as simple as her family wanted it to be so that they could make themselves feel better about their own disastrous marriages. She moved out of the red brick house we were living in and got a separate apartment up the street. I helped her move everything into it, but it didn't work because I was over at her apartment every single night, and within a few weeks we started having sex again at her apartment. The bond had been tested, but it was too strong to be broken easily, and I was very, very persistent with her that it was her I wanted, not her sister. I was just sexually attracted to her sister, not in love with her. 2 different things. It took a lot of persuading and patience on my part, but after about a month I won her back, and she moved back in with me again. We resumed our relationship as before, with the exception that she now no longer spoke to her family at all. They had decided to scapegoat me, a shaming tactic that they often resorted to with several other husbands of their daughters, some of whom were quite violent. And for the next 5 or so years, she didn't speak to her family. She had chosen to side with me, not them. And for the first time, I felt vindicated. I had done something stupid and shameful, and it shames me even now after all these years to recount it. But I knew I was a good man, and so did she, and I knew that I deserved a second chance, and she gave it to me. I was determined never to let her down again. This woman loved me, and perhaps I needed to put our relationship through something so drastic in order to prove to myself that she really did love me. I never had any doubts after that. My ex was very, very good to me for many years. She always put me first, and almost no one else in my life ever had. We had a warm, sweet, loving relationship, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We were best friends as well as lovers. Then one day we lost our jobs at Half-Price Books. She got us fired because she got into a very loud dispute with the manager over some policy or other, and she came storming into the break room in tears while I was eating lunch. I had a good relationship with this manager, and I liked the job very much, but now he came in trailing after her, and the two of them went back and forth in front of me. This woman had stood by me when I'd behaved like a jackass, and I wasn't about to take anyone's side against her, ever. So I stood up and said, "Okay, we're out of here." Then she and I stormed down the aisles with the manager trailing after us, begging me not to leave, but that was that. So now we were unemployed yet again. I very quickly picked up a job as an assistant manager at Barnes & Noble in Paradise Valley. But I had to wear a tie yet again, and I was not happy with the job at all, and they were aware of it. The corporate atmosphere was not my thing. My manager knew nothing about books. He'd formerly been the manager at a sports authority. It didn't make any difference to him what store he was managing, and none of my coworkers knew anything about books either, and they were all very coldly formal with me. Needless to say, I wasn't there long. My ex, meanwhile, out of curiosity, had decided to try phone sex. She was a very hypersexual individual, we both were, and she liked the idea of sitting on her bed making men come while she faked orgasms. Although every now and then somebody would turn her on and she would get out her vibrator and have real orgasms with them, sometimes with a man and on occasion a woman. None of which bothered me in the slightest. I was amused by it, actually. I would be writing in my office and then stroll down the hall to refill my coffee cup, and I would walk by as she was faking orgasms, and she would wink at me ironically, and I would smile. But the money wasn't good. It was only minimum wage, and she did that for about a month before she got bored with it and decided to find employment elsewhere. She then found an ad in the back of the New Times that was looking for someone to be a telephone operator at an escort agency. This agency was located in Scottsdale, and she went down to apply for the job, and they hired her on the spot. Her job was to take calls from men looking for prostitutes, and then to route the men to specific women at various hotels around Scottsdale. It was easy money, and she started making lots of it, about $500 a night, as I recall. She loved the job. But this particular agency was run by the mafia. I would drive down there late at night at the end of her shift and sit out waiting for her in the lobby where all these gorgeous, high-class young prostitutes were sitting around watching television with their muscle-head drivers. My ex told me that her boss had a shotgun propped up in the corner, and that when she asked why he had it there, he explained to her that sometimes we get visits. Whoa, that made me nervous. What have we gotten ourselves into here? Fortunately, though, what happened was that one of the girls took a disliking to her for some reason and complained to the boss, who then fired her instantly. She had been doing the job for about a month at that point, and she had loved it. And I remember her throwing the phone at the wall when they called to fire her, and her yelling at the top of her voice, "Fuck!" She was furious about losing it, and she was determined to get another one. I advised her against it, but she told me to fuck off. This was her thing now, and she wasn't going to let anyone get in the way. So she went back through the classifieds in the New Times, found another agency in Scottsdale looking for a telephone operator, and she drove down to meet with the owners. Again, they hired her on the spot. This time, though, the owners were not mafia. They were a wealthy African-American couple with whom we went out to dinner a couple of times, but I found the man to be shady and evasive, though I liked his wife. And she and my ex hit it off very well. Her name was Nicole, let's say. At this particular agency, my ex very soon became promoted from telephone operator to the boss of the whole operation. She quickly took the place over and was now in charge of a stable of about 10 or 12 prostitutes. At this job, all the girls loved her, and she got along very well with them. I would drive down to Scottsdale late at night, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., to go pick her up. We would go to the various hotel rooms, like pimps, to pick up all the money from the girls, and then sometimes we would all go out to eat at a 24-hour Denny's. I distinctly remember how surreal it felt to be sitting at this huge table at Denny's, surrounded by beautiful prostitutes, 6 or 7 of them, all recounting tales of the troubles they'd had with their various tricks. They liked me as well, and I got along just fine with them. Meanwhile, I was still working at Barnes & Noble, and I hated it. But one day she called me up at work and said, "I know you're curious and that you want to do this, but I'm only going to let you do it once. I'm going to pick out one of the girls for you to fuck, and you're only going to do it once, and then I never want to hear about it again." It sounded reasonable to me, so I agreed. She told me to make sure I had $350 in cash on me, and on my lunch hour, I drove over to the hotel to which she had directed me. When the girl opened the door to her room, she was indeed very attractive. Her name was Rose, and she was wearing a bright red dress that was very sexy and appealing. She told me to come in and get comfortable, which my ex had already cued me in on. It meant to strip totally naked so the girl can make sure you're not wearing a wire. I did so, and I put the $350 in cash on the night table beside the bed, and she asked me what I wanted to do. My ex had told me that you can't be vague. You have to be very blunt and specific about what you want. So I said, "I want to fuck you there on that bed in doggy style, and I want to come inside you." She was agreeable. So she took off all her clothes, and we both lay naked on the bed as I began fingering her. When she was wet enough, I put the condom on while she arranged herself on all fours, and I entered her and came very quickly. That done, I put all my clothes back on, thanked her for being so nice, and then left. That night when we were home, I told my ex exactly what had transpired, and she became really moody about it. For the rest of the night, she was uncharacteristically withdrawn and introverted and didn't want to talk to me. But by the next day, she had gotten over it, and that was that. The only time in the entire 15 years of my relationship to this wonderful woman that I ever cheated on her, and it technically wasn't cheating since she had arranged it for me, she had given that to me as a gift because she was in love with me and wanted to make sure that I knew it, and I was very grateful to her. There were never any erotic problems in that relationship again. So then one day she came to visit me at Barnes & Noble during my lunch hour. It was nighttime, and I was miserable at the job. I'd been working there for a couple of months, and I told her I was sick of it, and she said, as we talked in the car, "Then quit. Forget about it. I'm making so much money now, you don't need to do this job. Don't go back in there. Just concentrate on your writing for now." Then we drove away, and I was rid of that shitty job. At the time, I had been giving lectures at the Astrological Institute in Scottsdale, doing a course on the psychology of the soul, which is available on YouTube. I uploaded all of their audio lectures only. I began with the Freud-Jung conflict, then went through the ideas of Joseph Campbell, James Hillman, Stanislav Grof, and a few others as well. I had already taught myself the basics of astrology in order to interview the astrologer Rick Tarnas for my first book, but he stipulated that I not publish the interview until he had finished his book, Cosmos and Psyche. Many years later, I published the interview in the Mountain Astrologer in 2010, issue number 149. I realized, despite William Irwin Thompson's naysaying about it, that astrology was real and that it worked. But after interviewing Tarnas, I set it aside for 3 decades, as I did not want to be known and hence dismissed as an astrologer. Nowadays, I have come back to it and embraced it, and I give readings to clients on a regular basis. If you ask me how I think it works, then I will tell you that nobody knows how it works. Tarnas's description of it working by the principle of synchronicity is a non-explanation. Nobody knows how it works. We just know that it does, as it's empirically demonstrable. Newspaper horoscopes are merely a caricature of astrology. Meanwhile, my ex was becoming very good friends with one of the girls, a woman named Charlene. She was addicted to cocaine and would get heavily coked up before she went in to have sex with the guys. But Charlene and my ex had now decided to do tricks on the side, off the books. They put ads in the New Times advertising Charlene's services, and so when she did her trick, the two of them pocketed all of the money, and the agency got nothing. I was getting nervous again. That sounded very unwise to me. The owners weren't mafia, but if they found out what my ex and Charlene were up to, who knew what they would do? We didn't know what these people were capable of. We had saved up a bunch of money, so I told her that we should just take the money and run, move to San Francisco. She had already lived there for a year while going to college in San Rafael, and she wanted to move back. And now she no longer had any ties with her family in Phoenix, so we were both ready to go. We then said, "Fuck it, let's do this." So we packed up all our belongings into a U-Haul truck, boxes and boxes full of heavy books, along with all the furniture we had bought with my royalty check from the sales of my first book. And we spent the last night in that dark, empty house lying on the floor in the living room on a mattress, but neither of us could sleep. So at about 4 a.m. we gave up and just decided to go. We got into the truck, but I soon noticed after we got onto the freeway that the truck wasn't handling right. It was wobbling back and forth because of the weight of the books. I realized that we were going to have to go back to U-Haul to get a bigger truck. We had to backtrack for about a half hour to get to the U-Haul place, where we arrived just as the sun was coming up. They gave us a bigger truck, and we spent an hour or so loading everything from the smaller truck into the bigger truck. All this on no sleep at all. But when we got back on the road, the truck handled just fine. We crossed through the deep desert at dawn as the sun was liquefying the mountains into incandescent orange hills. We made it to the town of Blythe, which is the first town across the border from Arizona into California. By then it was about noon, and we were already exhausted, so we decided to spend the rest of the day at a motel there. The next morning, we got up before dawn and headed through Los Angeles to San Francisco. At one point, the freeway became saturated with copper-colored fog that was so dense you could only see the red taillights of the truck that were glowing in front of you, and that was scary for a while. But we arrived in San Francisco later that afternoon at around 2 p.m. We had been invited to stay at the home of a lesbian couple who were friends of ours. One of them, a woman named Calla, had been one of the publicists which my publisher had hired to help promote my first book, and she had become a close friend of ours. So we stayed with them for about 3 days and then found a tiny apartment on the corner of Telegraph and Alcatraz, right on the border between Oakland and Berkeley. We lived in the second floor of this building. The window furthest to the left furnished us with a view looking out at an Arco gas station. There was a nice view of the ocean down at the end of Alcatraz, and you could actually see the island on a clear day. The landlord was a grouch, as landlords often are. They are usually mean, nasty, greedy, power-hungry little trolls, but we charmed him and gave him cash and moved right in. So now we were situated in the Bay Area, and both of us got jobs immediately. She was hired to work with another publicist that my publisher had hired. He hired her to work for him as his assistant, but she didn't like the job because he was always moody and irritable with her. I got a job at a bookstore up the street in Berkeley, and within just a few months, the owners there were so impressed with me that they offered me a much better job. They were opening up a new bookstore down in North Beach across the street from City Lights bookstore, and they asked me if I wanted to run the place. It came with a huge pay raise, and I accepted immediately. I was no longer working for minimum wage. So I set to work transforming an old, decrepit, used bookstore that had been in that location for years into something very cool and hip. This is the view of that intersection where we could see the Transamerica building, the tallest building in an earthquake-prone city. I gutted the place nearly single-handedly, rerouted all the bookcases, tore down the old ones, went through all the books and tossed the junky ones, mostly textbooks, packed the place with better books as they sent me shipments from the mother store. We put up movie posters on the walls of films that had been adapted from novels. It was a dream job. I had complete control over the place. Everyone there, and the staff was small, about 4 or 5 other individuals, had to do everything I said and do it my way. That was a first. I had never been a boss before. I could hire and fire anyone I wanted. I hired Frank McCourt's niece when she wandered in looking for work, but she was on heroin and unstable and so couldn't keep the job. And I had also to undertake the unpleasant task of letting a few people go. I hired one girl who forgot to tell me one important detail about herself, namely that she was dyslexic and couldn't understand how to alphabetize. So I had to let her go. And one woman, an old woman who had been working there for years, killed herself about 2 weeks after I had taken over the store. One night she just threw herself off the Golden Gate Bridge. One of my coworkers told me that she had been depressed for a long time and that her son was a drug addict who was in and out of jail. Movie stars and famous film directors came in on a regular basis. I got to meet Francis Ford Coppola one day at a spaghetti dinner benefit for the homeless that he had hosted. I specifically volunteered to help make meatballs, though I have no cooking skills to speak of, because I had word that he would be there. I remember him coming into the kitchen just as I was mixing up the meatballs and leaning over my shoulder saying, "More breadcrumbs, more breadcrumbs." In other words, I got directed by Francis Ford Coppola. The film director Philip Kaufman was a regular. He would come in and we would discuss his very literate movies and various aspects of how he'd made them. He had directed The Right Stuff, which features Chuck Yeager, played by Sam Shepard, breaking the sound barrier, and he was impressed when I told him that Yeager had been a close friend of my grandfather's. Tom Waits was yet another regular, and he was actually the only celebrity who ever bought anything. He would make huge Jenga towers of books, CDs, DVDs, etc. at the cash register. The great comedy filmmaker John Landis came in, the director of the Blues Brothers, and I talked with him for a while. Sean Penn came in and bought a poster. It was a blast, the greatest job I've ever had, and I did it for 5 years. Meanwhile, my ex had gotten yet another sex industry job. This time she was working for a .com website that advertised for escort agencies. She wasn't in charge of anything, but she liked the job and held it for about a year. And then we decided to get pregnant. One day when she was out of town visiting her brother in Virginia, she called me up and said, "I want to have a child now." We both had good, stable jobs, and we were making decent money. I was 35 and she was 31, so it was a now or never moment. I had always been afraid to have a child because I didn't know if I would perpetuate the cycle of abuse, and I was terrified of being a bad father. But I was even more afraid not to have a child. I was afraid it might be the only chance I would ever get, and that if I didn't take the opportunity, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So I agreed. Now, there was another couple who lived upstairs who were about the same age as Melinda and I, with whom we had become friends. The guy was training to become a psychotherapist, and his wife was an English major who read fiction ravenously and was trying to learn how to write it. But a certain sort of weird couples rivalry arose between us, or rather I should say, between the two women. This couple moved out of their small upstairs apartment into an actual house. My ex then grew jealous and insisted that we too should move into a house. So we found a very nice house, a large one with 2 bedrooms, in Richmond, in a neighborhood that was almost entirely Chinese. Indeed, our landlords were a very pleasant Chinese couple who were using the rent money to put their kid through college. It was much bigger than our friend's house. The English major grew jealous, and now they were trying to get pregnant too, but they were having trouble. Once my ex and I had made the decision, we simply went into the bedroom and I came inside of her for only the second time, and once again we conceived. I hit the target with no problems. The psychotherapist was apparently having difficulty hitting the target. The English major then grew jealous that my ex got pregnant first, so they had a falling out. About a year earlier, we had already gotten married. In 2002, we had had a small wedding at a Victorian bed and breakfast in Berkeley. She still wasn't speaking to her family, and so none of them were invited. Only my mother, my brother, and my mother's dud of a third husband came. It was a nice, pleasant affair. We had been together for 7 years at that point and decided to make it legal. And I was no longer drinking. I wanted to be sober for the sake of the kid, so I had given up alcohol, and I remained sober for the next 3 years. And there I am, the happy, domesticated husband, soon to become dad. It was the happiest time of my life. It really was. It was so much fun. Now, after the 9 months had gone by, the kid was on his way. I remember that it was about 11 o'clock at night, and she had gone to the garage to take out the trash, and she came back inside and said, "A whole bunch of water just came out of me." Boom. Panic time. I packed her up into the car and drove down to the hospital in Berkeley. The staff got her situated into a room very quickly and efficiently. I sat in an armchair beside her bed, channel surfing my way through the rest of that night. The baby was not born until around 7 p.m. the following night. The whole thing took forever, and here she is pre-epidural, in agony, and I'm making her laugh. She looks very cute, actually. She bore it well. The pain was getting worse, so they offered my ex an epidural. This meant they would shoot a drug called fentanyl directly into her spine, but she was in a lot of pain, so she insisted on it. And I remember that as soon as they injected her, the baby's vital signs plummeted, and the room became a flurry of nurses scrambling around until his vital signs stabilized. That baby did not like that drug, and I have suspicions about fentanyl. It may have played a role in the subsequent development of my son's autism. By the next evening, the baby was ready to come out. I wanted to watch the whole thing, as I think it's cowardly for men not to want to participate in the birth of their own children. I started filming it with a digital camera, but stopped, feeling embarrassed. I think there are some areas technology should keep out of. She was sitting there in agony with her legs spread open, and the doctors and nurses, all of whom were female, were working on her vagina. Soon the baby was crowning. Her vagina was starting to open, and I could see the pink head trying to come out, but it was too big to get through the birth canal. My wife was screaming and pushing and screaming and pushing. It was a nightmare for her. Now I know why the Aztecs regarded their women who gave birth as warriors. At one point, the doctors were threatening to use forceps to pull the head out, but that's dangerous because it can cause brain damage to the baby. However, she gave one last heroic push, and out came my son. They cut the umbilical cord and whisked him over to the cleaning station. I remember thinking that it was the most surreal moment of my entire life. Wow. I had just witnessed the birth of my own son. It seemed somehow far-fetched. They allowed me to hold him briefly, this pink squirming creature from another world. Then they handed him over to his mother and wheeled us up the hall to spend the night in a room. All three of us went straight to sleep, completely exhausted from our ordeal. In the middle of the night, I woke up to check on the baby. I turned on the light and leaned over. And I'll never forget what then happened. I looked right into his eyes and felt something click, as though with an audible snap inside my brain, and I realized that we were bonded for life no matter what. I fell deeply, instantly in love with him. I knew at that moment that I had made the right decision to have a child. And so next will be Chapter 8, Raising My Son. Looks like a happy father there to me.